you have to accept terrible things. Like, you have to accept that they exist, and it's predominantly within your race. The fact that you do perceive us as a threat. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to clutch your bag when somebody who might not dress the same way as you rocks up next to you.
Do you want to maybe introduce yourself and let people know who you are? Because people may just think it's this random person.
Yes, like, where do I even start with the
introduction? And also how MiloConvos actually started.
Okay, I think you kick it off with where MiloConvos started, and you'll say who I am to you, and then I'll kind of like polish up the answer if I need to.
Okay, cool. So as far as I remember, MiloConvos happened when I was interested in this one guy. Things didn't work out. The girl was stressed. She was crying. And we sat down, like, we just had a really deep conversation. And from there, it kind of became like a thing, like a deep heart-to-heart conversation. So we've been friends, I think, since 2009.
Yeah, actually.
It's been a minute. So tell people who you are.
All right. So as Ange said, I'm Sam, and we've known each other for a long time in the creative space. Also, just walking many life journeys together. And as she mentioned, like, she's gone through her fair shares of ups and downs in relationships and so on. But I mean, we've always and same here. I mean, we've always had each other's back, and we always used to have these MiloConvos where we'd share ideas, man, aspirations, what our ideas were around a lot of life issues and so on. And I mean, we're going to dive into some of them right now. But yeah, that's who I've been for Ange, and just also an equal creative science person and so on. Okay. Just a member of society, man.
That's cool. Yeah. So I wanted to jump into the conversation. This is quite a heavy conversation, but I feel like it's an important conversation to be had. I was actually speaking to a few friends of mine today who didn't want to post about Black Lives Matter because they didn't want to offend their friends. So I feel like it's a conversation that needs to happen. I want to ask you, when did you first become aware of racism?
I think for me, my journey was obviously a lot. It happened a lot sooner. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't happen as soon as, when you're a toddler for other people. But for me, I think also just, there was different elements of what racism was. I'd even take it a step back and say, listen, whenever you feel like you're isolated from a part of society, I mean, my mom is, for example, Ugandan. My dad is South African. And already that dynamic, a lot of people weren't used to, having parents from different ethnicities come together and make a family. So, and then on top of that, we moved overseas for my work with my dad, and I think that's when it became apparent, because I was around probably six years old, and that's 2 years just after 1994. And I mean, 1994 was a critical year in South Africa where Black people got the first chance to vote, So in Korea, I mean, back then, now it's miles different. They've been exposed, they've hosted the World Cup, many nations have come there. But before, kids, they don't hold back. They just stare at you, parents staring at you, not knowing, hang on, what is this? I always tell people, like, I felt like I was in National Geographics, where you're just like this person on display, and you can't even understand because you're so young,
Yes.
And then obviously, what do people do that don't understand something? They either insult it or they distance themselves away from it. So you had to learn how to navigate through those complexities, man. But I mean, with guidance of good parenting as well, also my support from my brother, and those few voices, and this is where I probably wanted to jump into it, like those few voices that are that fit in the demographic of the ones who are, sending out racial slurs, are so important to the one receiving them. Because if somebody didn't come to me who was of that different skin color to me, that was slurring at me the whole time, and say, hey man, we're still homies, like, it helps distinguish that it's not a race thing, it's a person thing. And this is what I like to always define it to.
And how does racism make you feel?
So back then, of course, maybe also age being, and immaturity, like not immaturity because you're young, you're very young. I mean, from 7 years old, up until about 12, that's where we stayed there for around 5 years. I mean, you feel like, geez, because you feel terrible because it's not anything you can change. I can't change being Black. I can change how I speak. I can change how I articulate myself. I can change how I dress, my hairstyle, whatever. But the pigment, I cannot change. And that's like, is not a conclusion you come to as a young person very easy. And then on top of that, once you get to that point where you're like, I can't change this, then you're faced with the next question of, what do I do with this? If I stay in this environment, like, what do I do with this? And it is a difficult one where, once again, support structures around you, you know, who are you listening to? Who's telling you? And I think it's brilliant. And people shouldn't feel offended, especially like white folks shouldn't feel offended when Black parents are reminding their children, like, your Blackness is beautiful. It's not to kind of like turn the attention elsewhere. It's to really combat what he's hearing outside of that environment, or what she's hearing outside of that environment. Because back then, everything from Barbie dolls to baby little toys, everything from the messages that society was sending you at a small age, they're telling you that white is right, you know? And there's no representation in the good way of Black. You're seeing Black on these cops shows that are being chased, you know? And it's yeah.
And I know you kind of touched on it when you were speaking, but what are some of the real struggles of growing up Black for white people that may not be aware, because they may disconnect because of their privilege, because they don't struggle with those things, so they think it's not that bad. So what are the struggles of growing up Black?
So I think you said that word that has obviously also had its fair share of trending, and its privilege. And it's, you know, we always, you know, have given the word privilege such a negative connotation, but it does exist, you know? And I think it's the irresponsibility of how it's used that frustrates the other ones who are not privileged, you know? I think when it comes to whatever it is that you're experiencing, it's important to become aware of this privilege. It's important to know that it's there, know that it exists. The very apparent stuff, which is like racial slurs, you know, weird stares, you know, that kind of stuff, you know, whether it's bullying, and with the emphasis of the fact that you're different color-wise, you know. There's general bullying. I mean, whether you're small and big, there's general bullying. Then there's, you know, that apparent stuff. But where it's really difficult, and where a lot of the disjoint is between our daily lives and normal white people's lives, is that you don't see it when it comes to small things, and you see it when you're a lot older. For example, let's say there's a class project, right? And you have to partner up with a couple of guys, especially in a larger class setting like university. It is implied that when you are white, somehow you're smarter. Okay. Even if multiple times we've seen the tests come out and there's certain students who are excelling, somehow, weirdly enough, you know, it's implied that this person knows. In a more professional setting, I worked in an environment where science was a big driving force, so in the engineering sector, and it is implied when somebody rocks up and this is a white person, whatever the case may be, somehow he knows what he's doing. And whenever there's a Black person in running the project, all of a sudden the same respect or the same initial like trust that the project is in good hands isn't there. Like, we're not starting at the same place. We're not starting at the starting line. They're starting 50 meters ahead in a 100-meter race. You know, they don't have to worry about the introductions and their titles and their qualification. No, I mean, a white guy can walk into the room and say, I've just got experience. I don't have the qualification. You could have qualifications to here in the moon, but the moment your accent sounds a bit different, or you have a heavy set accent, or maybe, you know, you struggle to articulate yourself, all of a sudden your brilliance is questioned. You know, I mean, those are small things. We're not even talking about if we're in a more suburban area and, you know, you're kind of just having one of those lazy pajama days and you're not really all well put together. Regardless of who you are behind the scenes, you could be a great dad, a community leader, a leader in the church. Just because you look the way you are and you're not presentable, your hair is not as tamed as other, you know, demographics are, all of a sudden you're perceived to be some kind of threat in that environment. You know, you clutch your bag a bit tighter, or you get the double look just to make sure you're still in the same distance away from when I last saw you, you know. Okay. Even, I mean, with me, I go an extra mile. If I'm approaching somebody who is, let's say a white female, I'll, from a distance, literally just small little things, not obvious, like, hey, I'm coming, don't, I've got nothing in my hands, but really just to make her comfortable. I'll make myself, known that I'm in your space. Hey, listen, how are you doing? Hi, sorry to disturb you. Subtle things. Sorry to disturb you. I don't want to disturb you or anything like that. I just wanted to ask, where is the nearest so-and-so, or where can I find this? Or do you need help? Even sometimes just helping with plastic bags. Hey, can I help you with something?
Yes.
And it's these extra hurdles, these subliminal hurdles that you have to jump through, which add to this journey.
Like as a white person, like some of the stuff that you're saying, like I wouldn't have even thought about that stuff, because it's not something that I battle with on a day-to-day basis. Like you just go about your life and you take those things for granted. What would you wish that white people knew about the struggles, just so we can be a bit more aware outside of what you just mentioned now?
It's those subliminal perceptions. Here's the problem. What I think I've realized about the struggle of most white folks migrating their minds or their mindset to what we're talking about now is that you have to accept terrible things. Like, you have to accept that they exist, and it's predominantly within your race. The fact that you do perceive us as a threat. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to clutch your bag when somebody who might not dress the same way as you rocks up next to you, or battles to articulate themselves very well in your language. All of a sudden there's this pretense or apprehension that with you interacting with that person. Those little things, if you can acknowledge that they exist, then you can start to talk about what can we do to make them good better. Because when I speak to you and it's a foreign thing, and you refuse to accept that they exist, it doesn't matter what I will tell you, because from what base point are you working from? How can you track and keep accountable that you're improving on these things? If you don't accept them. So I would say the first step is just to accept them. That does not mean that you are racist.
Okay.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just pick it up. Pick it up in your normal things.
Like, I've seen white people who aren't racist become racist. Or not become racist, get offended when somebody says white people are racist. I'm like, I'm not racist. But then you get those weird ones that are like, I've got a black friend.
So I've been that one black friend in so many cases because my history, I'm just going, I mean, I've probably told you this many times, but my history is just.
We've hung out in situations where you've been the only black person there.
It's always a laughing, funny thing and whatnot, and as long as that's the case, and it's my one black friend. And truth be told, I always tell people, like, I'm not the standard. I'm not the status quo. I'm far from that. My background, my exposure, how I grew up, the way I speak, literally my accent, I've been told, it's different to the general population of South Africa, And I've seen multiple times that it's easy to befriend a Sam because he kind of speaks like you. He kind of has been exposed. He's traveled a bit. So I'm what they call, I'm palatable.
Okay.
I've worked in companies that are predominantly Afrikaans, extremely Afrikaans white. I'm not saying brilliant people, lovely to work with, but I've realized in that environment, the only reason that separates me, you see it so distinctly when somebody else comes in with a heavier accent, who's more proud of maybe, or in touch with their cultural background than I am, slightly dresses a bit different, or has a different set of interests to, kind of Western things. All of a sudden, you can quickly see that room turn to like now we're looking at that black guy, as if I'm not in that same, as if I'm not black as well. And it tells you, like, there's just this different level of I would say, I don't know, like palette that people need to expose themselves to and say, listen, let me just not judge something before I know it,
Yeah, I hear you. I want to touch on just everything that's been happening in the States, and just to hear your thoughts behind the recent events around Black Lives Matter and the death of George Floyd.
Just keeping abreast with that, seeing what the narrative is, following it, seeing at the core of what it is, and I think one thing that has been prevailing is that, look, people are fed up. They are fed up because, I love, there's a video that you gotta see of Trevor Noah. He explains this thing. Look, it's a bit of a lengthier one. It's around 18.
I watched it. The one where he's filming from his phone.
Yeah. He
having
nailed it. He
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
nailed it. Talking about like how society is a contract,
yeah,
and I couldn't have said it better, because truth be told, we all sign up to what we both agree society should be built up on. There's certain rules and regulations. But the crazy thing is, we sign this contract, and then our side of receiving of safety, of fairness, treatment, equality, all those types of things are not kept up. So
yeah,
all of a sudden, why should I then keep your side of things? Meaning, don't loot, don't break things, don't burn things. How else do I get your attention? Because
yeah,
the other version hasn't been working.
yeah,
And now I'm not saying, yeah, we need to be burning things down. No, but what I am saying is we need to get your attention, because for some odd reason, you get to go home, and it's not even a story you bring up, that if your father gets stopped. But when I get home, I realize that, oh crap, my dad might not make it home if he gets stopped. So the tone in the house is completely different. And then you start to say, but why must life be this way?
yeah,
So George Floyd, if you look at that case, if you look at many others,
yeah,
it's terrible that the conversation that Black families need to be having, you know for not even just an advanced or a really special way of life, just to be normal like everybody else in that country.
yeah,
All the things that should be normal, to be pulled over and be able to ask the officer, why are you pulling me over?
yeah,
Not even with an attitude, why are you pulling me over? And for him to feel the urgency or the need to actually explain himself, that's a common thing. It
yeah,
shouldn't be a thing that's special. Now all of a sudden, protocol is different for Black families. Hands on the steering wheel, make sure that you're not making any sudden movements, be extra complacent. I mean, allow yourself to get detained when you completely have not done anything detainable, or detain worthy rather. I mean, that's ludicrous. That's absolutely ludicrous. So I think for me, like, one area where I think it's a bit saddening to see the lack of vigor behind his response is the president. I mean, this guy can literally start a war through a tweet.
yeah,
He has the powers, incredible things. I mean, he stops the world's trade with, with China, and
yeah,
he has those powers. Yet when it comes to the law enforcement and the judicial system in his own country, he's very lackadaisical to make a distinct "you're fired" approach,
yeah,
which he's known for. Fun.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
a bit disappointing. Yeah.
It is. I was actually watching something today where I don't know if you saw the video of Karen where she called the police on the guy in the park, and she was
Yes.
taking,
Yes.
he was in trouble, and they were saying that a lot of people, when there isn't video recording, those people get locked up and they have to pay for their bail, and a lot of people that have,
Oh, yes.
they don't have money to pay for their bail, so they spend years, sometimes years in jail, for something
Yeah.
that they didn't even do, and
Oh, yeah.
that's something as white people we don't see, because, and also, I mean, those are Karens, those are racists.
I'm gonna say something. It's gonna sound a bit controversial or whatever the case may be, but that lady, that Karen, is in every single one of it's in white people. It is
Yeah,
there. That person is there if you want to push that button. And uh, the thing is, I'm quite sure if you go to that lady and you ask around before this incident, if you asked any of her Black coworkers, I'm sure that they wouldn't have had a problem with her, possibly. And quite many of these other different people who call the cops with frivolous claims, like kids are playing in the street. Oh, hey, there's all of this. I mean, even just how they completely over exaggerate everything,
yeah,
total propaganda. Like, those people, I'm sure, are functioning citizens with many other Black people within their spheres. But
yeah,
all of a sudden, when you push a button of frustration, it taps into this new subconscious. And we're trying to say, listen, accept that it's there, so that when it comes out, you stop that. Most
100%.
people like to think that, like, Black folks are inherently violent and loud and all those types of things.
Yes,
Truth be told, if you push anyone there, and we're just a race that has been pushed throughout history,
yes,
all the time, we're that race that's pushed. So we have to get loud. We
yes,
have to get all defensive, and we've learned violence from our oppressors. So when we
yes,
give it back, all of a sudden it's, oh no, you guys are violent. Oh my gosh, what are you fighting for? Gee whiz. Civil
yes,
rights. We're all humans. All lives have mattered. That's not true.
yes.
That's not true.
Like people who say, like, every time somebody posts Black Lives Matter, and you always have that one white person, no, all lives matter. I'm just
Yeah.
like,
Um,
somebody
listen,
explained it so perfectly. they said it's like having a breast conference, a breast cancer conference, and somebody walks in and says all cancer matters. Yes, we know all cancer matters, but we're
Yeah.
discussing this right now.
Yeah,
So
I think it hits a lot closer to home because most people can relate with love. So he was saying that imagine your girlfriend comes home, your wife comes home, and she says, "Baby, I love you," and his response is like, "Oh yeah, but all women like I love all women. Like you are my woman. It's
yeah,
different. You know what I'm saying?" And that's what there is at times like importance to distinguish when one thing is completely swayed out of the norm
yeah,
and is deprived of something. It's important to pay attention to that thing, you know. Not to say that these two things are mutually exclusive, like because you're paying a lot of attention to the one, the other is not equally important. It's
yeah,
not true. I mean, parents do this all the time. If you have an older sibling or if you ever had a younger sibling, you've seen it firsthand. There are
yeah,
times where your younger sibling, when they're a month old, there's no ways that you're gonna get as much attention as that kid. No
yeah.
ways. It's impossible. But you're just as important.
I want to ask you, as white people, beyond just posting on social media, because I saw a lot of people were posting today, just the black block in terms of Blackout Tuesday. But beyond that, what can we do? Obviously, starting with kind of becoming aware that there's a problem. What can we do to make it easier?
First of all, I don't want to villainize all white people. That's not true. Some of my closest friends are white folks. You know what I'm saying? Some of the most epic experiences I've experienced was because of my relation to white people. You know what I'm saying? Um, but first and foremost, I would say, and I love the fact that you asked this question, is that one, don't get defensive. When we tell you a horror story that comes from forefathers, don't get defensive. That's the one. Two is there's times where you have to carry a conversation without me being in the room. Like and the one time I can actually relate this to something that's really critical is like, for example, when the whole movement of men are trash came about. A lot of men, including myself, you wonder like, oh man, I'm not a bad guy. Like, oh no, not all men, this, that, but you're missing the fundamental point. There are certain things that there's a certain conversation. So you have to put on the student hat and accept whatever the teacher's teaching because they have gone through that. I had to sit and listen to ladies express themselves of how they've been taken advantage of, some beaten, some, abused and all those types of things, and not be defensive like I'm the one causing it, you know? But what that can do is that once I'm a student in one conversation, it can allow me to be a teacher in another conversation. With my demographic, the men, I can go and carry that conversation effectively because I know how to speak their language. So those of you that are willing to listen, willing to learn, like this call, it's so fundamental because I'm hoping that you can take what Sam has experienced and many other versions of me that you're close to, hear these stories, listen to our ideas of how you can educate yourself to not be ignorant, not profile, not do all of those things. And when you are with your white counterparts, share that as if you were me. You get what I'm saying? Because you speak their language, you have their privilege. You can say, guys, it's not cool. Imagine if I did this to you. And they will hear that, they'll understand that, they'll relate to it. And all of a sudden, a poignant point gets drilled home, as opposed to me shouting at a brick wall because they're still defensive. They're still worried about their, I don't know, halo over their head, which we've never displaced in the first place.
Yes. Now I hear you. As white people, how can we do better? Now that we know these things, how can we do better? Because obviously, I think there's things that we can't. Like for me personally, I can't fix white monopoly. I can't but what can I do in my life to make things better?
Oh, man, that's awesome. So, very practical things. I mean, one, just like learning a language. I think this all boils down to one level of communication. Because once you can understand me, understand what I'm saying, then you can at least start to appreciate other sides of me because we'll be able to, speak to one another, right? What I would suggest, just like learning a language, you got to be around people. You got to be around this difference, you've got to be around that differentness that you don't get. It's like learning in school. If I don't understand mathematics, what do most people do? What do parents do? They bring tutors around you. They bring extra lessons around you. They put all of these extra resources around you for you to be more exposed to that language. Same thing with demographics. If you want to understand me, you can't do it sitting in a suburban big house with Wi-Fi and heck, lights and electric blankets. You can't do that. Go with a black friend and go sit in the hood where you know he knows that you're safe or she knows that you're safe there, and see what it's like. Spend a day there and see what it's like when little kids are staying in the streets until 9, 10. And then you're like, wait, but spend the next day there and see why. Go to that kid's house and you'll see this gang of them in a tiny little house.
Yes.
I don't want to just sit there and get hotboxed. No.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? You'll start to understand the little nuances that build up our makeup as a black person, you know? Do it all the time. Don't separate yourselves from their reality, because I think that's what often happens. Like people in general, in this context, white folks like want to understand us from a storybook or from I don't know, some kind of literature or something. It's not like that. Come into my world, experience what it's like. Be pulled over with cops with me in the car and see what it's like in the context of America, and see like my protocol, see the quick prep conversation that I give you. Hey man, control your voice. Don't speak above a certain thing. You know, make sure you do 1, 2, 3 things. Then you'll see how crazy it is.
And with regards to just people voicing their support, how do you feel about churches that are silent during this time? In terms of not saying anything.
Oh man,
because it's tricky.
So
and even influencers,
yeah,
they don't want to fumble the bag.
Understanding when they describe who Jesus is, that was a guy who had principles, regardless of the arena, regardless of the protocols. If you break a principle, he will stand up. He's flipped over tables. He's eaten bread in churches on the wrong days. He's done certain things. I mean, because people are fundamentally hungry. Like, how do you not help somebody?
Controversial. Like, that's what people don't understand. Oh, it's very controversial. Yeah.
You know, if you're talking about you love Jesus, then you love what he loves, and it's people, all kinds of people. Yeah. And you can sympathize, and not only just sympathize from a distance, but do something about their pain and point them to the direction of the one who supplies you. You know, yeah. But if you're there because, oh man, a lot of your members are white and you don't want to rock the boat, you've missed a massive opportunity.
Yeah.
And an opportunity to test the fabric of the lessons that you've been teaching them. Yeah. Maybe even to test your own fabric, that your lessons that you're teaching are not all inclusive as you think they are.
Yeah. Because it does send a message of not being inclusive.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Not saying something is saying something, by the way.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be debated.
Yeah.
Not saying something
I think a lot of churches don't get involved in politics. They don't like to discuss politics. And I get why, but I feel like there's certain things that need to be discussed from pulpit because people are looking for answers.
Of course.
Need the right people having those conversations.
What do they refer to the Holy Spirit as? They said he's going to be your teacher in all things. In all things. Literally in all things. He will be your teacher in all things. Yeah. And if you are not well versed about a topic or a specific subject matter, go back to your Holy Spirit and ask him to expose you to that. You know what I'm saying? Why? Because you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you, right?
Yeah.
So why all of a sudden are you shy away from certain subject matter or topics? Politics, the church doesn't talk. I mean, are you kidding me? If you know anything about the church used to run politics back in the day. In some areas still do today. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden we're just like, no, we don't talk about that. Nah. Yeah. Miss me with that. Like, no. You either are doing what that Bible says or you're not.
Yeah, I get you. I want to close off now because I'm sure you have things that you want to do.
No, that's cool.
I just want to find out if you have any last thoughts and just any encouragements to close off.
I think, you know what, here's what I'd like to close off with, and it's just to remind everybody, from white people to black people, especially obviously directed because this is more like to educate white folks. It's like, you're not like terrible people. You're not. Your ignorance makes you terrible. Just like our ignorance makes us terrible. Do you know what I'm saying? It's a societal problem. Like, educate yourself. That's why this whole time I've been trying to say, educate, exposure, learn, go put on a student hat, because takes down ignorance. Ignorance leaves this huge dark spot for assumptions to dwell. And assumptions cross demographics is the worst thing that could exist, because you don't fundamentally understand me, and you're going to react in a way that causes me to react a certain way to you because of that. So as a group of people, as humans, let's cut down the ignorance. And I'm telling you, a lot of these issues will solve themselves. You'll have a lot more Angelas and Sams.